Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our U.S. Africa Policy Update. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Nega Chapu, and I am the CEO and founder of Asha Strategies LLC and also African Public Affairs Committee. Today's program is being co-hosted, and we're so grateful to our partners, the U.S. Africa Institute and African Communities Together, for joining us today and for lending us their expertise through their members, Diana Konate, who's the Director of Advocacy at African Communities Together, and Dr. Tadios Balai, who's the Executive Director at the U.S. Africa Institute, who will be speaking with us shortly. I appreciate each and one of you for taking the time to join us for a very timely and important conversation on what's currently going on. Whether you are joining us from the US or somewhere across Africa or anywhere in the diaspora, this discussion matters right now because of how this US-Africa relationship is shifting and how it's being characterized, especially how we as the diaspora are being affected by some of these shifts. We have seen too often that these policy decisions made in Washington without African diaspora input and without communities also fully understanding how these decisions translate into everyday realities, especially when we talk about immigration, trade, education and mobility, remittances, and economic opportunity. It absolutely matters how we respond as a community and how organizations coalesce around these matters. I just want to remind folks that it's 2.4 million sub-Saharan African immigrants that are living here in the United States. And subsequently, a lot of these people here are supporting families back home across the continent. And so the decisions that are being made here shape everything that also happens at home. And so I'm happy today that we're going to be joined by some experts to discuss all of this. So today, I want to do three things. First, provide a clear update on what is changing as far as U.S.-Africa policy, and then give some analysis of what these shifts mean for the African diaspora community at large, African governments, and us living here in the United States, and then outline some concrete actions that diaspora communities should try or work on taking now to secure some of our interests and opportunity, because policy is not abstract. I mean, we could see how some of these changes are affecting people in real time, whether it's through visas, business folks, education access. We are just in awe of everything that is going on. But being honest, in awe is not an option. I think it's very important for folks of our caliber to discuss these things and also make sure that we are active in this sphere. So I'm really glad that you all are here for this conversation, and excited that we have our two folks joining us today to continue this discussion. So before we get into the immigration and the educational portion of this program, I wanted to kind of set the stage and bring information on the context to kind of make folks understand what is happening. As we have seen, we've had a new administration, and this particular administration has shifted away from the policy that was largely the flame around development. And so now things are being centered on this US-China competition when it comes to trade, removing aid from the discussion, and putting front and center strategic interests of the United States when it comes to US-Africa relations. And we're seeing that having consequences both internationally and domestically. We have seen, especially in immigration, and migration. Those patterns have been tightened significantly. United States has dropped sharply when it comes to international migration by at least more than half. And that represents a fundamental tightening of this, of many of these communities. And so part of this conversation, which Diana will also address, is how these new policies are affecting specifically the African diaspora. But she's going to delve into that more. I am going to bring it back and just discuss how these new different policies, especially surrounding this newfound interest of critical minerals and demand for things like cobalt and lithium, has surged in terms of US-Africa competition and this race to secure energy resources. As we can see from the last national security strategy, there was a line there when it described how it was going to work with Africa. It kind of said that as much as there is still some engagement, it's the attention to Africa is going to be peripheral because they're more interested in securing these minerals for energy transition and their supply chains. And so we've seen, especially in the last week, a lot of activity surrounding that. There was a critical mineral ministerial that was hosted at the State Department by Marco Rubio. And one of the highlights on the Africa side for that was the Democratic Republic of Congo. They came in with a very big delegation trying to negotiate some of these deals in terms of how to take away these resources from other rival suppliers like China. On migration management, we have seen a lot of visa restrictions, specifically for countries like Nigeria. There's about 75 countries that were put on restrictions. It's the continent itself, or many countries on the continent, are increasingly being viewed as through enforcement lenses, with a focus on preventing irregular migration, but also trying to manage flows. We've seen, especially on the refugee side, a reduction in number of refugees. And in addition to that, we've seen something strange where there was a reduction for everybody else, but there was this new admission of white South African farmers that were being brought here while everybody else's numbers are being reduced. Another thing that I wanted to touch base on was how we have seen the amount of foreign assistance being completely removed through USAID, and how that is affecting some of these things that we are seeing, for example, in Nigeria when it comes to security. Having removed a lot of the health services and food security and humanitarian support has definitely created a very bad environment. And so this is another issue in terms of what is currently going on with US-Africa policy and relation. I know all of this sounds very, very, very depressing, but we're here today to see what we can do. In addition to what is going on with USAID's termination and how that is affecting Africa, we have seen that Washington has moved from trying to help, trying to put some measures to assist some of these countries through a complete turnaround and kind of going with the trade, not aid lenses. And so this has made things a little bit complicated. Things have been a little bit difficult in terms of how African governments have been able to respond, and how they have been able to get some resources when it comes to healthcare and filling the gap and the void that these resources have brought together. Another important thing that I wanted to bring up was the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which was renewed, but only for 1 year. Um, it's a short-term renewal, which I feel that doesn't give us much time to really change anything. And the tariffs as well have kind of risen when it comes to African exports, making it very difficult for business, especially exports from different African countries to the United States. And so we're seeing, especially in places like Lesotho, where there was a lot of apparel and agricultural industries having very serious issues when it comes to being able to export their products. And so while this new narrative that we here in the United States are preferring trade over aid, we are still having difficulty with the trade mechanisms that are put in place. African exporters are having difficulty negotiating rather than getting the resources that they need for exporting. And so this is also affecting diaspora businesses in the US, and they're facing a lot of uncertainty because of that and the tariffs that are being placed. So without some of these trade frameworks, long-term diaspora investments are slowing down. Another thing that I wanted to touch on when it comes to US Africa and how the diaspora has become a lifeline is remittances. Um, Despite how much global uncertainty there is right now, diaspora communities remain one of the most stable economic support system. I know that my family sends money home on a weekly basis, and I know that as people like me, remittances to the continent continue um, very, very high. And so this year, we've seen that remittances flows to the continent have crossed almost $100 billion. Anyway, $100 billion mark, surpassing both foreign direct investment and official development assistance. And so for some of these countries, the remittances that they're receiving account for over 20% of their GDP. So these have been a major challenge when it comes to um, folks from the continent being able to receive money if we tax it. There was at some point an idea to tax in a great way how much money was being sent through remittances. I believe currently is still at 1%, but this is money that shouldn't be double taxed and continues to be taxed. So while diaspora communities continue to provide stability to um, countries back home, here we're seeing how some of these restrictions and changes to the policy are affecting how diasporas are trying to work this out. And so we're seeing families navigating um, all of these changes, bringing uncertainty in immigration, bringing it to businesses when it comes to exports and navigating tariffs and trade uncertainty. And then lastly, there has been also some issues when it comes to providing visas for de-education, and that will be touched by Dr. Belai, who is going to give us some insight into that. But ultimately, we wanted to have this discussion today to help unpack some of these shifts and how they're impacting the African diaspora. And with that, I'd like to introduce um, our next speaker, who's going to bring it all together when it comes to immigration and what it's going on. We have Diana Konate from African Communities Together, who is going to share with us some of the information regarding some of the changes that are affecting the African diaspora at large. Diana is an expert and she's worked on Capitol Hill and at some point founded the Congressional African Staff Association to make sure that African voices are present in conversation affecting the continent. And so in this moment when visa refusal rates are climbing and things like TPS are hanging in the balance for several communities, her perspective and information is very, very important. So Diana, I'm gonna leave the floor to you to walk us through some of the things that are happening in terms of the immigration landscape and how it's affecting African diaspora communities.
Sure. Thank you, Nneka. Thanks for having me on the panel today. Good afternoon, everyone. As Nneka mentioned, my name is Diana Kanate. I am the Deputy Executive Director for Policy and Advocacy at African Communities Together, or ACT, as we're also known. ACT is a membership-based organization of African immigrants and our families. And we work to improve the lives of Africans here in the US. And what that means is we empower Africans to integrate into the country socially, to advance economically, and to engage civically. And we are an organization of mostly low income and working class Africans. Many of our members are undocumented or have less than permanent status. So we've really seen this administration's chaos firsthand. And we've been working extremely hard in leading this fight to push back. So Nneka asked me to use this time to describe what we're seeing in the immigration space and how it's impacting Africans living here in the US as well as abroad. So I'll start by saying, the Trump administration came into office, or I guess Trump came into office promising a campaign of mass deportation. So this is really something that we had expected. And we expected harm to come to our community. But I don't think we expected the level of harm that this administration is bringing down on the immigrant community. We didn't expect the level of violence that we've been seeing. We didn't expect the level of cruelty, against immigrants and really just the American public at large. And to be clear, this mass deportation campaign is not about undocumented people in this country. It's really about removing as many not Africans, but as many immigrants as possible from this country, and preventing migration from countries that this administration deems as undesirable. And based on what we've seen about, as far as the countries and the people who have been targeted, it's very clear that Africans are falling into their undesirable buckets. So what's happening right now? I like to divide this up into four things. One, limiting migration to the US. Two, putting up barriers to lawful status. Three, removing lawful status that people currently have. And then four, enforcement detention. So starting with limiting migration to the US, I don't think I need to tell this audience about how hard it already is for Africans to get visas to come to the US, whether it's to migrate permanently or temporarily, visit temporarily. But this administration has really worked to cut back even on the few lawful pathways that Africans have, to minimize those even more. So in the beginning of the administration, we saw the suspension of the refugee resettlement program, a program that many Africans benefited from. And as Nneka mentioned, a pathway that is now reserved for white South Africans, white Afrikaners. We've seen a suspension of the diversity visa program. That was also one of the few lawful pathways that Africans had to come to the US. And in years prior, up to 40% of those visas went to Africans. So that was really, or the diversity visa program is really an important lawful pathway that has been cut off. And then most uh, commonly discussed is the travel ban. And we have seen um, there are two main travel bans that we're seeing. The first one around national security, around overstay. And I think that with this administration's, I would say, guidance from the Supreme Court about how to lawfully block people's access to this country, they've really taken that and ran with it. And so we have seen them expand upon the travel ban from the first Trump administration to now include countries that the administration says are likely to overstay their visas. And that is an excuse that the administration has given for placing a lot of African countries on the travel ban, on the first uh, travel ban. And we know from the data that that's just not true. I was talking to the Burundian community this weekend about the travel ban and what it means for their community. And I shared that that country is on the list because of their overstay rate, as the U.S. government puts it. But when you look at the number of Burundians who overstayed their visas that resulted in the country ending up on the travel ban, it was 124 people. 124 Burundians overstayed their visa. Um, and you know that's the number that the government believes overstayed their visa. The data really isn't all that accurate. But that's the number that the government believes overstayed their visa, and the reason for Burundi being put on the partial ban list. Italy, on the other hand, had over 8,000 people overstay their visa, but they were nowhere near the travel ban, being put on a travel ban. So that just goes to show how this administration is, they kind of have a sense of what it is they want to accomplish, and then they figure out how to go about justifying, what it is that they want to accomplish. So that's what we've seen with the travel ban. And um, I think when we call it a travel ban, people don't realize um, how much broader it is, because it doesn't just impact people from abroad who are from these countries, but also people within the US, because what the administration is also doing is saying that people from travel ban countries who are in the US also pose some type of threat to the country. And so for people from those countries who are in the US who may be applying for new immigration benefits, USCIS now has the ability to look at country-specific factors in making a decision about whether somebody is going to receive benefits, immigration benefits. People who have currently pending applications with USCIS, those applications are paused. So if anybody was going through the waiting for their naturalization interview, if anybody was, applying to adjust their status, if anybody was applying for a work authorization, all of those applications are currently paused for people from travel banned countries. In addition, the administration is also looking back at people from those countries who had gotten immigration benefits under the Biden administration and reopening those cases and re-vetting those people. All of this in a way, as a way of limiting people's access to lawful pathways and really any kind of immigration benefits in this country. So, that kind of is a good segue into the second area that I wanted to talk about, the barriers that the administration is putting up for people who are in the country. In addition to what I just mentioned about folks from travel banned countries, the administration is also working to end asylum in this country. So we've seen that they've paused processing of asylum applications a few months ago. Prior to that, we saw closing of asylum access at the border. We've seen the arrest of asylum seekers at court, as a way of putting those folks into expedited removal and quickly deporting them from the country. We are now seeing more and more of our members coming to us about their cases being ended, terminated, and them getting notice of deportation to Uganda. And these are people who are not from Uganda. So just any kind of way that the administration is able to cut off people's access to lawful pathways, they're doing that as well. Third, for people who already have status, they're doing the best that they can to take away that status. So we saw the termination of many parole programs that had been started under the Trump administration, under the Biden administration, and those folks becoming undocumented and now subject to mass deportation. We are seeing the termination of temporary protected status, TPS, and those folks becoming undocumented. Yesterday there was a court that ruled that folks from Nepal, Honduras, and I want to say Nicaragua, that it was okay for the Trump administration to go ahead and terminate those or allow the terminations to go forward while the case is moving forward. So thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are impacted and who now face potential detention and deportation. Most recently, we've seen the administration attack refugees. So, in my view, this is just everything they've been doing is cruel, but this just seems so low, knowing that refugees in the country, oftentimes it has taken years for people to even get resettled into the US. Oftentimes people are coming from really, heartbreaking situations, and to finally make it into the country, to finally have some semblance of safety, and then to have the government going after those people just seems especially cruel. But we've seen them, target Somali refugees in Minnesota, putting them into detention, reopening their cases, re-interviewing them. We've heard about cases where they will detain someone, they will fly them out to Texas within hours, question them, and then just let them go in Texas. No phone, no nothing, no way of getting in touch with family, no way of making their way back up to Minnesota where they were detained. Just I mean, it's really it's shocking the level of cruelty that this administration is bringing down on immigrants. And most recently, we're hearing that the administration is also looking to deport those refugees, especially refugees who have just recently um, been resettled to the U.S. So, it's to say the least, there is a lot happening. And we see what's happening with enforcement and, ICE in many of our cities. But it's really even worse than what we're seeing because it feels like sometimes, as horrible as the images that we're seeing are, that it's a distraction from all the things that they're doing behind the scenes. And there's just so much that they're doing behind the scenes. And just to quickly touch on what we're seeing around enforcement, and particularly when people have been detained and when Africans have been detained, people don't have access to interpretation or translation services, so they don't know what's going on. They don't have a sense of what their rights are, even when they are in detention. They're oftentimes being flown to locations far away from their families, from their support systems. There's a lack of adequate food, including foods that our communities eat. There aren't areas for people to pray. Our communities tend to end up in solitary confinement more often than other communities. So it just gets to a point, it feels like the goal is to really break people down while in detention. And we've had members who have said, like, this is too much. I rather just leave. And we've had members leave the country because of how horrible the treatment in detention is. So it's all a part of this whole mass deportation plan and goal to get immigrants out of this country. And again, I like to remind people it's not just undocumented immigrants. It is not undocumented immigrants. It's all immigrants. We've seen they're looking to denaturalize people. We've seen they're looking to, for any reasons, to take people's green cards away. They're even looking to redefine what it means to be an American by challenging birthright citizenship. So we are just in a place of we're in a very dangerous place as the African diaspora and just immigrants living here as a whole. And I would say that even with everything going on, um, we can still push back. And we are, we're a very, very small organization, but we believe that we just cannot see everything happening around us and allow it to go on, to be quite frank. And at work, we are involved in advocacy at the federal level, the state level, and locally. Our federal advocacy has always um, um, focused on immigration policy. But over the last year and a few months, we have shifted from that advocacy to really focus on one, community defense. So making sure that our communities are educated about what's happening, how it impacts them, how to prepare, doing Know Your Rights. We have a community guardian program in our New York chapter where we train the community on, uh, bystander intervention, on filming ICE, on just everything that we can do to make sure that our communities are protected. So that's been one focus that we've had over the last year or so. And then our second main focus has been litigation. So one of the best ways that we've seen that we've been able to stop a lot of these bad things is through the courts. It's not, it's unfortunately the Trump has placed um, a lot of judges in appellate courts, which we're seeing now is having an effect on some of these cases. But we have been able to stop some harms from happening. So ACTA is currently engaged in 5 lawsuits, one around voter purge in Virginia, one around courthouse arrests in New York. We have 2 TPS litigations. So one we sued to challenge the termination of TPS for South Sudan. The US government says South Sudan is fine. Everybody should be able to go back. And all of us who are familiar with South Sudan, we know South Sudan is not fine. And so we've been able to stop the termination of TPS for South Sudan. Same thing with Ethiopia. And just last week, we filed a lawsuit to challenge the travel ban of the 75 countries. And that is, yeah. So a lot of work, but work that we definitely think is necessary in this moment. And I'll say that even though our work has shifted, that our advocacy is still very, very important. Because at the end of the day, that's how we actually affect real change. And nothing changes if we do not engage with our elected officials. And what's needed in this moment is the voices of African diaspora folks in the immigration debate, because I can tell you that they are not hearing from us enough. We need them to know how these policies are impacting our communities. We need them to know that we are watching them. We will hold them accountable for actions that they take, actions that they do not take. And it's very, very important. I talk to folks on the Hill, and they really honestly do not know what's going on with their communities, especially their African communities. Sometimes if they are in a district where the African community does not engage, they don't even know that community is even in their district. So there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. And I tell people, we work with African immigrants who tend to be low income, working class. Many of them are undocumented, as I mentioned. So these folks tend to be most at risk. And so we never want to put those who are more at risk to actually put them in harm's way. But so a lot of our work these days has been to outreach to the African communities that aren't as at risk, folks who have status, folks who are US citizens, second generation Africans who are here in the US, people who have a certain level of privilege and who are able to, speak at the press conference, who are able to show their faces in a way that, some of our members don't feel comfortable showing their faces, showing their names. But we can't put our heads down and think that we'll just let this pass by, because if we put our heads down, by the time that we lift our heads, this is going to be a very different country from the country that many of us came to, the country that we believed would provide certain levels of opportunity, certain levels of protection, certain levels of due process. And yeah, I just really, really encourage folks, even if it's one phone call. Well, don't stop at one. If you can make one phone call, you can call your member of Congress weekly. You can set an alarm, and every day think about what pissed you off and call them and let them know. I will end by saying when I was on the Hill, we got many, many calls, but they weren't the types of calls that you would want influencing your lawmakers. So we really need, um, you know, uh, the other side calling and really pushing our lawmakers. I'll say one more thing. We I'll give an example of how important it is for the American people to be engaged and to make their voices heard. We had been talking to our members of Congress about not funding DHS because of the abuses that we were seeing. We were very clearly seeing ICE commit against people, and our members of Congress were saying, "Oh no, we're not willing to shut down the government for this," and like it's basically their words to us. Their What they were basically saying to us was, this isn't that important for us. And so as voting was happening on appropriations and on the funding bills, it went through the House. Democrats voted for it. Then that weekend happened. Alex Partee in Minnesota was killed. The American people, it was kind of like a wake-up call, like, wait, Americans are getting killed, white men are getting killed. And all of a sudden, members of Congress, especially Democrats, shifted. Whereas a week before, they had been telling us, we're not willing to shut down the government for this. All of a sudden, they were hearing from their constituents and how pissed people were. And they were like, oh, we're now all of a sudden ready to shut down the government. And this happens often. This happens over and over, where pressure from the grassroots, pressure from constituents, pressure from the public at large is what's going to get our elected officials to act. And in this moment, it's very, very important for the voices that they're hearing from to be those that are directly impacted and oftentimes disproportionately impacted. And for us right now, that's African immigrants. If we don't say anything, our families are not going to be able to come to this country. Right now, people cannot file for their spouses, for their children to join them in this country. And the more that we allow it to continue and not push back, the worse it's going to get. So I will stop there. I'll stop my rambling there and pass it back to you, Nneka.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for that comment. I mean, um, it's clear that the gates are narrowing and they're going to continue unless we say something. So it's important for us to gather and discuss these things. Our next speaker is Dr. Thaddeus Belay, and he is at the U.S. Africa Institute. He is a visionary that is refusing to let these education gates close. He has been doing a lot of critical work on academic diplomacy, building bridges between American universities, HBCUs, and African university. He often speaks about the hidden crisis in our community, the fact that African student visas refusals have climbed nearly 50%, and he sees this as a big problems, especially because of the educational component, with all of them being denied a chance to connect between here and Africa. So here is Thaddeus to tell us how to um, protect this moment and ensure that students remain a priority, especially in this time of um, strange moments in U.S. Africa policy. But Thaddeus, take it away.
Thank you so much, Nika, and I appreciate for organizing this important conversation. And then good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thaddeus Balai. I'm actually joining you from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where the African Union Summit is happening this week. and I'm the founder and executive director of U.S. African Institute. We are a national organization that works within the intersection of higher education, immigration, and exchange programs, and we do a number of policy advocacy in terms of promoting access to higher education for Black immigrants, including undocumented students in U.S. higher education institutions, and also help build coalitions among our partner higher education institutions, including HBCUs, to make sure that undocumented, international, and African or Black students are empowered and protected. And I'm very excited to join this conversation today to be able to discuss how the current immigration policies are disrupting African or Black immigrant students' mobility, and also uh, access to higher education, and of course, U.S. and Africa academic partnerships, including exchange programs uh, and immigration policies, as always, has been shaping our higher education system in the United States in terms of who gets a visa or who can afford tuition or who feels safe on campus or even who gets invited to the U.S. to study or even to collaborate and then partner. And then for Africans and Black immigrant students, including undocumented students or Black international students, those doors are closing at multiple levels. Now I will highlight three important sections and, with respect to student mobility and access to higher education, and also in exchange programs and university or academic partnership between U.S. Universities and African institutions. And then when in terms of student mobility, we are seeing increased visa denials and administrative delays for African students or I would say, Black students in general, not only from Africa, but also from the Caribbean regions. And in fact, the visa application have been, the rejection rate has, increased over the last, few months, and ever since the new Trump administration came to power. Over 96% of the student visa applications have been rejected from Africa. And then recently, the State Department also revoked over, I think, 6,000, yes, close to 6,000 student visas, and majority of those students are African students or Black students. And effective January 21st of this year, the Department of State again paused all visas uh, I mean, visa issuances to immigrant visa applicants with almost, I think, 24 or 25 being African countries. And also the department named 38 countries that are subject to paying a visa bond ranging from $5,000 to $15,000. And of course, travel restrictions. And Diana was also talking about that, so I'm not going to repeat that. And students are missing their semesters, they are losing their scholarship, and they're also afraid of leaving the US because of the fact that they're not, allowed to come back to the United States, and they're also, of course, losing their work permits. And then these policies are disproportionately impacting Black majority countries, including African countries and also the Caribbean regions, who have been sending thousands, hundreds of thousands of students to our college campus, each year. And then so this is not just affecting, the Africans or the Black students, but also the United States itself. I mean, the US is losing talent in real time. So student mobility, has effectively, been restricted because of, those immigration policies. And if you look at also, higher education access, which is also being restricted, not only by at the federal level with immigration policies, but also at the state level. At the same time, these different states are restricting students and making sure that college is unaffordable or inaccessible, by international students or undocumented students. And I'll give you a brief highlights of those states, and we've been also advocating with a number of our partner institutions, including the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, and of course, as a higher education institutions. And if you look at Oklahoma, uh, uh, recent bills, a lot of bills have been introduced, which prohibits anyone not lawfully present in the U.S. from qualifying for any situation. This would affect undocumented, not only undocumented, TPA students, international students, even those who are also on a valid non-immigrant visas, like such as students and work visas. And Nebraska, if you look at it in Nebraska, they have also introduced bills that require students residency for non-citizen students, and also eliminating pathways for undocumented students to have access to institution. And if you look at also in New Jersey, they have introduced, and just recently last month, they have been introducing a number of bills at the state senate level, and also in the house, and those bills effectively making those students ineligible for an institution or some kind of state financial aid. And I'll come to Texas. Nick told me to focus mostly on Texas. And as Texas, that was the first state to pass in a DREAM Act almost 24 years ago, right? And providing an institution to undocumented immigrant students, which allowed, hundreds of thousands of undocumented students who lived in Texas for at least 3 years and then graduated from local high school to pay in-state tuition. And however, this 24-year-old law was overturned by a federal judge last year, 2025, because the Trump administration uh, sued in the state of Texas. But within hours, Texas conceded, and then this bill was effectively struck down. So meaning the institution benefit for undocumented students has been removed. Of course, there has been a lot of efforts by community organizations, education advocates to reinstate the DREAM Act, but still, the students are not allowed to have access to in-state tuition, meaning they're required to pay two or three times higher than the previous tuition fees. And Black students, African students, who are very much, invisible in the immigration discourse, nationally or even at the state level in Texas, they have been impacted, and tens of thousands of undocumented students who have been in Texas in a public college, in universities. Approximately 60,000 students have been impacted because of this policy, right? Many of these students, they went through the Texas K-12 system, and they relied on this policy, but now they don't have that benefit anymore. So these are some of the immigration policy, not only just the federal level, but also the state policies and how they're have been impacting Black students and undocumented and international students in general. And if we look at also the international level, U.S. Africa university collaboration and partnerships, and including exchange programs, and I mean, like, beyond the visa, the tuition, we're also seeing the dismantling of education diplomacy and exchange programs with African nations. And the State Department has cut 93% of their Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs budget. We actually lost two grants at the beginning of last year. because of these policies, and not only just smaller organizations like us, but also a lot of international participants, scholars, students from Africa that have been impacted by this budget cut and policy. For instance, programs that have been historically building a bridge between the United States and African countries have been closed completely. They shut down those programs. If you look at the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders or the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, they have been effectively shut down by this administration. And also other programs like the Fulbright programs, the Fulbright Specialist Program or the Fulbright scholar program, they have been also reduced by this administration. So, African scholars and students are impacted because of this. And of course, other international exchange programs have been also reduced, including the International Visitors Leadership program. So many African scholars and students have now less opportunities to come to the United States for these exchange programs. And these programs were not just symbolic. They brought thousands of African scholars and students, to our campus, in the United States, and also they built research, partnerships between the U.S. institutions and African institutions. They supported entrepreneurship and promoting the U.S. diplomacy in African countries, actually. And then education has been the strongest bridge between Africans and our African nations and the United States. And that bridge is cracking right now and all completely closing down because of those policies. And those policies have been also impacting, of course, in institutions, like I said earlier, not only smaller organizations like us, we've been at the forefront of fighting for those policies. Programs to promote academic collaboration or university partnerships between U.S. and African institutions or exchange programs, but also our universities and colleges in the U.S. They have seen a decline in African students or Black students in enrollment. Black immigrant students in enrollment. They lost tuition revenues, funding cuts. We have seen a lot of colleges and universities losing their funding from the federal government. And then we have also we're now seeing very, very few collaborative research projects and then exchange programs between U.S. colleges and African institutions. And with the closing down of the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, which is a very historic exchange programs introduced by President Obama almost 12 years ago, and now that has been completely shut down. What we're doing at the U.S. African Institute to be able to address those challenges, as Diana said, where our communities, the Black immigrant communities in general, not only the students, we're very much invisible in the advocacy part or even in the immigration justice movement. So we're trying to make the experience of these students more visible to our state legislators or federal legislators, members from the Congress or even academic leaders. They don't even know, they don't even have the data, segregated data, who how many students they have from Africa, which African country, or how many students have immigration status, or they're undocumented or international. So we're pushing those institutions to segregate their data, and also we're building coalition among higher education institutions, especially HBCUs. We have the Texas HBCU, which has almost 9 colleges across the state, making sure that those colleges are at the forefront, and not only at the state level, but also at the federal level, to be a leader in advancing the rights of Black students on their campus. And we have these institutions who they have been fighting for African students, Black students. This is not a new thing for HBCUs. They've been doing this work for many years, being at the forefront of fighting for the students since the even in the 50s and the 60s, those, campus were sanctuary campus for, African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, who is the product of HBCUs, and basically, those, campus were sanctuary, campus, and, they were providing, resources and scholarship for the students. So we're trying to continue that legacy of providing support and protection to undocumented, students, international students, or immigrant students, from African countries. That's one thing that we're doing, and we're also helping them, launch emergency scholarship and support funds for those students, and providing, know your rights training, not only to the students, but also, to the college, administrators, making sure that they understand the needs of, those students. Um, so these are, some of the work that we have been, doing, locally, and as well as, yeah, nationally, to make sure that, Black students and documented or international students have the resource, the support and protection they deserve. So through, our advocacy work and coalition building with higher education institution partners, and also as our, community organizations. So I'll stop here. And I would be, happy to answer any question, or, explore any, collaborative, opportunities to support those, students, because, you don't really hear anything about, Black undocumented students and experience on campus. They have been, deported, at higher level. Yeah. So with that, I'll just stop here, and thank you so much again, Nika, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Thaddeus. Um, do we have any questions from the audience regarding this? If you do have questions, please unmute yourself so that we can get some of these questions through. Otherwise, we will be wrapping it up. Okay, well, as we wrap up today's talk, I want us to leave with a few reflections and obviously call to action. Things are shifting, we're seeing this, and for things to change, our voices need to be heard, and that means that we also need to participate in all of this policy work. It's been very clear that we're entering a new phase, whether it's on immigration, trade, or education. Things are being negotiated, need to be renegotiated, and things are being reconsidered. But one of the things that is definitely lacking is our participation and voices. So I'm hoping that with this discussion, we will be able to at least start paying attention really to what's going on, especially when it comes to having the diaspora present and being part of the decision-making process. We definitely saw, and I'm speaking from my side, right? On the trade and tariffs and the business part of all of this uncertainty is creating a lot of problems. And so we're seeing from the way that they're restructuring AGOA to keeping it 1 year, to the lack of assistance because of the closing of USAID. All of this is impacting national security, mobility, economic opportunity for the relationship between US and Africa. And so one of the things that remains constant among all of this is the fact that there are people in this equation. And this number of people who are a bridge between here and back home need to speak up in order to stop all of this from happening, at least. And so it's important, especially for me, that we are engaged, both socially, politically, through civic participation, but also being aware of what's going on. And so I'm hoping that this is a call for African diaspora communities that are here to come together surrounding these issues and really putting some pressure, just like Diana said. They don't hear from us. And when I hear they, I mean members of Congress, people on the Hill, um, policymakers don't really have a relationship with the African diaspora. So it's incumbent upon us to raise our profile in terms of having a conversation and telling as constituents how this is affecting us. So basically, what I'm asking everyone is to continue staying informed. Um, don't just engage only before November when they're asking you for your vote. Do that before election cycles so that you can also ask, well, these policies are affecting my communities and I'd like them changed. And if you want my vote, this is how to do it. And so I want to thank Diana and Tadios for joining us. I wanted to share a quick reminder this week, if you are in Washington, D.C., we're going to have a networking event here in DC. If you need information or details, please feel free to email me. And also save the date for March 26th. Part of the work that ASHA Strategies does, aside from U.S. Africa diaspora engagement on policy in different topics, we also working on exploring Africa's growing space in the global economy. And so thanks again for everybody joining us. Thank you, Diana, Konate, and Tadios for sharing your insights. And thank you guys for joining and contributing to this important dialogue. I hope that the conversation doesn't end here because our communities depend on us. And so I want to urge you to please continue sharing this information with your communities, your networks, organizations. And thank you so much for everybody's time. Have a wonderful afternoon and looking forward to seeing you guys soon, hopefully in person, if you're in DC on Thursday. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nika. Bye-bye. Good night.